Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Emily Hiles, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Squadron Leader Catherine Humphreys. This evening, we are honoured to acknowledge Major General Mubarak, Head of Executive Management for Policy and Cooperation, United Arab Emirates Defence, accompanied by Vice Admiral David Johnston, Vice Chief of Defence Force Australia. We also warmly welcome the United States of America Naval Contingent, representing the Naval Information Operations Command, Hawaii. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial and students representing St George Christian School from Hurstville, New South Wales. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national museum and memorial came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Corporal James Maxwell Ellis Allen. James Allen was born on 15th July 1901 in Canberra, New South Wales, to James and Mary Ann Allen. He never knew his father, who had died in the last days of 1900. He had 4 sisters, Elsie, Louisa, Margaret and Minnie, and he was known to his family and friends as Alice. Allen was a clerk living in the Sydney suburb of Longueville when he enlisted in the 2nd Australian Imperial Force on the 31st of May 1940. He underwent months of infantry training before being transferred to the 2nd 3rd Motor Ambulance Convoy. Embarking on the 10th of April 1941, Allen arrived in Singapore with his unit 2 weeks later. Over the following months, he was promoted to corporal. Following Japan's entry into the war, the Malayan Peninsula was invaded by Japanese forces. From mid-January 1942, the units of the 8th Division were involved in fierce fighting against the Japanese on the Malayan Peninsula. During this time, the 2nd 3rd Motor Ambulance Convoy transported the wounded to safety over dangerous terrain and under fire. On the 14th of February 1942, Allied forces in Malaya were obliged to surrender. Corporal Allen was among the 45,000 British and Australian troops who became prisoners of war. His unit was tasked with transporting the wounded Commonwealth troops into Changi prisoner of war camp, where he was held for 5 months. The Japanese soon called for working parties to build and expand new infrastructure across their empire. In July, Allen volunteered with B Force, which left for Borneo in July 1942. The men had been assured of better food and conditions, but the almost 1,500 members of B Force found themselves on a hellish sea journey, crammed into the cargo holds of the Ubi Maru for a voyage of 11 days before reaching Sandakan. Conditions at Sandakan descended in some of the worst experienced by prisoners of the Japanese. Prisoners, including the sick, were forced at gunpoint to work on the construction of a military airstrip and were often beaten by their captors. Illness and death ravaged the camp and food was scarce. And by January 1945, the prisoners were fending for themselves. The completed airfield was soon destroyed by Allied bombing, and between January and March 1945, some 450 of the fittest prisoners were ordered to march west to Ranau, a distance of around 260 kilometres. All were suffering from malnutrition and some from disease. In May, a second wave of marches was ordered and 536 prisoners set out. These men were in much worse condition than those on the first march. Malnutrition, disease, and the brutality of the guards meant that only 183 made it to Ranau. One of those was Corporal James Allen. The camp at Ranau offered no shelter to the prisoners, and without adequate food, the men died or were killed by the guards. Allen died on the 23rd of July, 1945. His cause of death cited as acute enteritis. He was buried at the camp, aged 44. Corporal James Maxwell Ellis Allen is commemorated on the memorial at the Labuan War Cemetery in Malaysia, and his name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left amongst almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Corporal James Allen, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the Director and staff, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support of the Memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening.